When's the last time we got a movie that awakened the chaotic bisexuals? Pirates of the Caribbean? The Mummy? Maybe The Matrix? Or Captain America the Winter Soldier, which still remains my favorite MCU film. And sure, the movies aren't about bisexual people per se, and the characters themselves aren't explicitly bisexual, but they're bisexual. I'll try to explain. Now, I myself am unfortunately not bisexual, so I won't try and speak on their behalf. This is just my point of view. Now, let's start with the obvious. Both the man and the women in question are almost always hot as hell, but like a specific kind of hot. Like for the women, they're cutesy, but also badass and capable. They're full of emotion and grit. And for the men, they're also hot, but not super macho rugged hot. They're more pretty hot. They also show a range of emotions, and they also yearn. And as a result, a young bisexual might find themselves being attracted to both. Now today I want to talk about a film that I believe has awakened many a bisexual. I mean, the female lead herself is a chaotic bisexual. And that film is Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Disclaimer, I am not an expert. These are just my opinions and my point of view. You don't have to agree. Grab your snacks and some water, and let's get into it. Now, growing up, I watched this film over and over when it was on cable, whether it was at the end, just starting, or in the middle. I would sit and watch the entire thing. I loved it. And as I got older, I kind of like started to think that maybe I was the only one who did. Now, the critics and general population hated this movie at the time, not because it was a bad movie, but because of the widely publicized and national news story that alleged that Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, the stars of the movie, had started a secret affair during the production, an affair that would ultimately break up a marriage. It was mentioned in most of the reviews of the movie at the time. Critics weren't even really talking about the movie itself. I remember reading one that were like, this movie is so bad it broke up Bennifer, or like, hope this movie was worth destroying your marriage, Ben, 2 stars. But what about the movie was bad? Like, was it a pacing issue, the story, the acting? Like, why exactly was the movie bad? I remember reading a really insane review that was like, same old action trash, and Angelina is once again relegated to action movie whore. Like, what the fuck? We just were not nice to women in 2005. I mean, we're still not, but like now with social media, there's a way for us to be like, hey, we don't all share that sentiment actually. Cause yikes. Now the Brangelina situation is messy as hell and long, as we're 20 something years later and it's ongoing and even messier. Being a celebrity must like blow ass. Like imagine having your relationship drama be national news. Everybody knows half the story but has a full opinion. An opinion, by the way, that they're aggressively and constantly sharing. And in this case, it's an opinion based on an unconfirmed rumor. Now, there are dozens of breakdowns on YouTube if you're interested in learning about the whole situation. I'm not going to go into all of it this video because it has nothing to do with the movie itself. However, I will acknowledge the obvious. For example, their chemistry in this movie is insane, and it's a very horny energy if I'm being honest. Let's hop into a little backstory. Mr. and Mrs. Smith was written by England-born Simon Kinberg. Kinberg is best known for his work on 20th Century Fox's X-Men series. Kinberg actually wrote and or produced every Marvel film post X2, starting with X-Men The Last Stand. Now, Kinberg came to the US to complete his higher education. He attended Brown University, and while there, he began working on the storyline for Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and it eventually became his final thesis project for his degree. Kinberg was ultimately able to sell the script while finishing his grad student program at Columbia University. And just like the dream to have your college project become a movie, Now, the idea for the script came from a personal source for Kinberg. He came up with the idea not from previous romance spy films, but from real life situations. He didn't have friends working in the CIA, but he did have a few friends who experienced some rocky issues in their marriage and were in counseling. Kinberg later explained, quote, "The way they were talking about it sounded kind of aggressive and mercenary, and I just thought it would make an interesting template for a relationship inside of an action film," end quote. Now, director Doug Liman, coming off slice-of-life relationship films like Swingers and Go, was set to direct. Mr. and Mrs. Smith is considered by the filmmakers to be a rom-com with an action movie in the background. Now, the film went through a whole bunch of cast configurations. It was originally supposed to star Brad Pitt and Nicole Kidman, but Kidman ran into some scheduling conflicts with the Stepford Wives, so she had to ultimately drop out. Disappointed he'd not be able to work with Kidman, Brad Pitt then dropped out. Now, Will Smith and Catherine Zeta-Jones were considered for the roles, as well as Johnny Depp and Cate Blanchett. Gwen Stefani reportedly got very, very close to being cast as Jane, and thank God she didn't, because we wouldn't have gotten the Harajuku era of Gwen Stefani. In came Angelina Jolie, who signed on to the project and explained how her two failed marriages to actors Johnny Lee Miller and Billy Bob Thornton helped her connect to the role. She said, quote, "It was a study in partnership in the things that go wrong and the things we fight through. At the end of the day, it's, can they work together as a team and do they have each other's back?" As soon as Jolie signed on, Brad came back to the project and the filming began. The pair had never worked together before and were reportedly excited for the opportunity. Now, the script itself went through many a rewrite. Carrie Fisher, who worked as a Hollywood script doctor, is among those who took a pass at those rewrites. Filming eventually started in January of 2004. Behind schedule because Brad Pitt ironically injured his Achilles tendon while shooting Troy. Now, filming continued on to be chaotic as hell for this production. Now, Doug Liman is said to be a chaotic director. He repeatedly infuriated collaborators, ignored studio notes, and gone way over time and tens of millions of dollars over budget in pursuit of his own subjective variety of cinematic excellence, a process detractors and admirers now call Limania. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Smith actually went about $26 million over budget, so Lyman famously dipped into his own savings account and built a set in his mother's garage in upstate New York, which he then destroyed it with a hand grenade when the filming completed. Just nuts. Also, the paparazzi were rabid during this time. Because of the anonymous tips sent to the tabloids alleging an affair between Brad and Angelina from people who most likely were working on the production of the movie, there were paparazzi constantly trying to get on set. There were so many paparazzi around that Lyman supposedly had to digitally remove some from shots in the film. Like, that's insane. Then there was like the 3-month gap in the middle of filming because the movie was so behind schedule with reshoots and Lyman's laid back direction style. Now, sometimes the changes came because they had to sort of like juke out paparazzi and sort of like get around the possibility of them interrupting the filming. But on other occasions, Lyman simply just couldn't make up his mind on how he wanted the scene to be shot. Now, all of these delays ended up affecting Pitt on his next production, Ocean's 12. Brad Pitt ended up leaving the Mr. and Mrs. Smith set to film Ocean's 12 for those 3 months. But Brad soon returned and the filming completed in March of 2005. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Smith was released in the US on June 10th, 2005 and grossed $487 million worldwide against a budget of $110 million. Now, it's a fun and sexy rom-com that continues to hold up to this day. So let's get into that plot. The movie starts off with married couple Jane and John in counseling. The therapist asks them how happy they are on a scale of 8 out of 10 and how often they're having sex, which is never, and then about how they met. We then cut to Bogota, Colombia, where they meet for the first time. The country is in upheaval because someone shot the Barracuda, and the police are running through the city looking for solo travelers. As luck would have it, Jane and John meet each other and use each other to escape suspicion. And apparently, after watching the film, Enrique Borda, the general secretary of the Bogota mayor's office at the time, sent a letter to Lyman expressing his anger at the, quote, total level of ignorance, end quote, in their representation of the bustling city, which has a population of over 8 million citizens. He claimed that the film showed a capital that was, quote, backward with little hotel infrastructure, with high levels of violence, ultimately totally chaotic and not at all attractive, end quote. Enrique ended his letter with an invitation for Lyman and the film's producer, Arnold Mitchum, to see that Bogota was, quote, nothing like the negative image reflected, end quote, in their movie. And by the way, they're not even in Colombia. They're in LA. This is Olvera Street in LA. Now, in my research, I wasn't able to find a reply to the Colombian government, so I think it's safe to assume that everybody kind of ignored their concerns. John and Jane drink, they dance, they kiss, and we cut to the next morning when they enjoy a cute breakfast together while the country quite literally shakes and burns all around them. Once they're back in America, they get married and they start building your standard hetero suburban life. But they're lying to each other and their disparate personalities cause issues. And we're shown all this through small, tense conversations and clever details like the literal space between them with a long dining table. The entire story is framed through their marriage. Their romance is the engine, the driving force of the movie. Now, Pitt and Jolie do carry this movie on some level, and I don't think this film would have worked as well with less talented actors, as the movie is basically entirely the two of them, while side characters come in and out. Now, the fact that they each go back to the marriage counselor alone near the beginning of the movie demonstrates that they're not able to communicate with each other, but they still want to work on their relationship. And the film steadily builds up this idea and allows them to work on their relationship through action. There's never an action scene that doesn't have the underlying tension of them working through their marital issues. Let's talk about John and Jane. Now, John is your standard chill but competent guy. He considers the job to be gut instinct, and he thinks you need to be able to improvise to get the job done. Jane does not improvise. She meticulously plans. You see that through the small details, like her purse being exactly long enough to get her from the floor where she kills her target to the street. A stunt, by the way, which Angelina Jolie performed herself. And you can really see the difference in their methodologies during the scene in which they're going after the same target. Jane has carefully set up explosive charges to take out the convoy. She's sitting in a nearby shack, monitoring the situation, while John just shows up in a desert car blasting music. His plan is a bazooka. Their friends, their real spy friends, are different as well. You have John's friend, Eddie, played by Vince Vaughn, the veritable man-child who doesn't trust women and lives with his mother. He offers terrible advice, which John half listens to. And then there's Jasmine, Jane's co-spy friend, who seems to be very practical as well. Now, when John and Jane find out that they're both assassins and are each other's targets, they both get more aggressive physically and verbally. When we get back to the house, it's an all-out shootout and brawl. But this brawl ends up serving a purpose as they come to a mutual understanding and level of respect. They both can take the shot, but they can't actually kill each other. Now, their new level of honesty continues after their fist fight and subsequent making up, and they have long conversations about their past as individuals, as assassins, and as a couple. And that's why the sex is insane. The root of the dishonesty, the tenseness, came from having to lie to each other about what the other does. Once the truth comes out, we shift, loosening the tense vibes and even flirty bantering back and forth. They realize, or rather remember, that there is love there. And more importantly, now they're able to start to work together as a team. First, the pair steal a neighbor's minivan, escaping their house while fellow assassins chase them. John is driving erratically, even though Jane is asking him to keep it steady so she can get a good shot. Jane then has them switch positions, and John still isn't listening.
They're bulletproof! They're bulletproof!
This shows us that there's still a lack of communication and teamwork. They also share more truthful information throughout this whole scene. They're, for the first time, trying to be completely honest with each other. The action is in the background. Now, the scene ends when Jane takes over and finishes the job herself. Throughout the scene, they basically function completely independent of one another. And here is, I think, the turning point of this movie. John and Jane meet with Eddie at a diner, and he tells the pair that they'll survive if they go their separate ways. But if they stay together, they're as good as dead. They understand the consequences and decide to make it work. A metaphor for deciding to stay together and work on the relationship instead of separating. They join forces and go after Dan's, the asset both of their agencies supposedly want. Now, on the Dan's mission, they at least attempt to make a plan. They attempt to show each other respect with speed bumps along the way. Jane has to assert that she knows what she's doing, and John disputes the way she speaks to him. The mission doesn't go very well, but I guess it's a success at the end. It starts as the Jane show and ends as the John show, a reverse of the previous action sequence, but it's still progress. It's messy, but progress. And it's their core issue. Jane attempts to make a thought-out plan, and John just goes rogue. Once they capture Dan's, they question him and get nowhere until Jane just whacks him over the head with a hotel phone. Also, if you look closely, Dan's is wearing a Fight Club graphic tee, which is a cool little Easter egg. Now, Dan's tells them that both their agencies are working together to kill them because they're too iconic to work together or something like that. And then once they find the tracking device that's hidden in his belt buckle, they flee. They hide under a storm drain and then reveal their individual ways out. Now, Jane argues that they should just call it what it is and split up, implying that their marriage was a failure. And John says,
"But you run, you'll always be running. I say we stay, we fight."
So now we come to their final stand, which takes place in a home goods store of all places, a nod to their previous empty attempt at living a regular domestic life. Now, according to my research, apparently this sequence was filmed both on a soundstage and in an empty IKEA. Now, the pair still have things that they need to work on, demonstrated by little moments of tension, but they still work together. They silently start to take their attackers out. Now, a great moment from this sequence is when Jane sees a cart of knives and gestures towards them. John gets her meaning immediately, and before they exit their cover, they nod to each other and stand up simultaneously. They're on the same page. And it's the same deal when they're on the elevator. She flies, he's bait, and they cover each other. And we've come now to the final battle, and they acknowledge that this is where they both want to be, fighting together for their lives and their relationship. And now they're completely in sync, working together. Then, as if to double down on that point, the music from their first night together plays. The film tells us, through this needle drop, that they're connected once again. The film ends with them in couples therapy again, but now they're relaxed, and honestly a little horny. But they're allied, and they're ready to face the world together. The reason I think this finale works is because they're fighting for each other and their relationship, something they weren't doing at the beginning. And it's unfortunate that this movie was viewed at the time as purely an action movie in which the two stars used the production of to start an affair. Because you're missing half of the amazing thing this movie does. You're missing the point. The point is that this movie should be judged as a great romance rather than a bad action movie, because the action serves the romance, not the other way around. All in all, Mr. and Mrs. Smith is a fun, action-packed romance starring two of the most beautiful people to ever walk this earth, spawning bisexual baddies all around the country. And that is what I will continue to think of whenever this movie is mentioned. But what about you all? What movies were your queer awakening? Mine was Batman and Robin. You know, when they had the costumes that had the nipples. This specific, suit up scene did it for me. And I want to know all yours in the comments below. And how are you liking these video essays? Would you want them to be longer, or are you okay with 20-minute bite-sized pieces? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for the support. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And as always, I will see you all in the next one. Bye.